So again, I did promise you that I would give this to you one paragraph at a time. Reminds me of the old story about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So that's why we're here today. We're on the first paragraph. We've already discussed the header. We've already discussed date prepared. Now we're going to talk about our right to represent. So remember that the Department of Real Estate requires that you have an employment agreement with your client. Otherwise, you don't have a client, right? You have a customer. Okay. But we need to have a client. Why? A number of reasons. One of those is we need to spell out our duties to them, our obligations to them, but at the same time, we also need to have some limits to what our liability is going to be. So we're going to start off. Paragraph number one is our right to represent. Okay. And so the buyer's name goes in that first line. And so you always want to ask the buyer, how do you want your name to appear on title? You never want to say, how do you want to take title? Because how do you want to take title kind of begets legal and tax advice, and we don't give that. So I always say, how do you want your name to appear on title? And then when they say, well, Bob, well, you got to figure Bob is probably not a natural person's name, right? It is a shortcut abbreviation of Robert, perhaps something like that. So since the buyer is going to have to at some time prove during the transaction, either to the lender or to the title company, that they are that person that is signing the agreement, that's what I have them do. What are you going to use for documentation of who you are? And so most times it's going to be a driver's license. We call that a DL, passport. How does your name appear on those documents? Because when you go in to prove who you are, that you are who you say you are, then you're gonna be pulling up a document like that. So we have to have the name here. And I know nicknames and stuff like that are cool, but that discusses my natural person. What about my non-natural person? So my non-natural person buyer, that would be an entity, right? A corporation, a trust, a power of attorney, could be a lot of different things. Okay, so I have my natural person, you prick, they bleed. You have your non-natural person, which is pretty much everybody else. And so remember that you're going to be required to provide documentation that they are authorized to sign on behalf of the entity. So you may start getting that process going early up. In a trust, you need the trust cert. In a corporation, you need a statutory agent, power of attorney. Obviously, you need to be able to prove you are that person who has power of attorney over somebody else. Okay, so and then the documentation as well. So that's my buyer part. Now we're going to have grants. Now I think it should say grants and employees, much like our listing agreement says. But this is where the broker's name goes in there, not your name, not your broker's name slash your name. This is the broker's name. This is the broker of record. This is the person who is responsible for the individual agents underneath their wing. Okay. And so you want to get the broker's name spelled properly as it's understood at the Department of Real Estate. Get their name spelled right. If you're not sure who your broker is, check with your broker, but do please make sure you get that right. It is not appropriate for you to put your name in here, right? This is not you. This is about the broker. Because remember, this is a listing agreement, an agreement with the buyer, and the broker is responsible for this document. Okay. So the non-exclusive right. So we're going to start off by default with a non-exclusive right, which means they can go do anything they want to do. They have all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're going to have some limitations to that in just a minute, but non-exclusive means it's not exclusive. And so in the parentheses, if you're going to make it exclusive, and we're going to check that box in a minute, check or not check that box in a minute. And if you do check that box, you've also got to address it in paragraph number 15 to represent the buyer in acquiring real property, not personal property. Folks, I see so many contracts that have washers and dryers and refrigerators and living room furniture and God, all kinds of addendums. Well, you do not have a license to sell personal property, right? I mean, arguably incidental to a contract, but you don't have the right, right? You have a license in the state of California to sell real property. That's land or anything affixed to the land, or in this case, a manufactured home with some limitations on that as well. For the representation period, you have to have a beginning and an ending date. The DRE wants that. We will discuss that when we get into the next paragraph, paragraph number 2.